The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello and welcome to the Daily Racing Forum webinar presented by Sky Racing World for the championships. I'm your host, Peter Thomas Fornatel, back with you. Very excited to talk about this series of 12 amazing races going to be happening over the course of the next 2 Saturdays in Australia. Those will be Friday nights Eastern Time in the United States. Going to be running them in conjunction with this amazing contest opportunity exclusively at DRF Tournaments, which you can find at tournaments.drf.com, where one lucky player will win an expenses-paid VIP trip to Australia for the Everest Tournament in October. Very happy to be joined this evening here, this morning there, by Australian Forum expert Jason Witham. Jason, how are you doing today?
Doing great, Peter. It's great to be with you and great to be with all your viewers and listeners this evening. Can't wait for the championships. It is the culmination of weeks and weeks of racing here, the grand finals of Australian racing, and the best of the best going around over the next 2 weeks at Randwick. The good news is the weather forecast is good. We're going to have sunny skies and firm tracks. We've attracted some great fields this year. It's one of the better renewals I've seen of several of the big races. Millions and millions of dollars of prize money on offer. We'll have huge crowds, and it's all set up for a great couple of weeks.
Can't wait for it to get started. Want to tell folks a little bit more about this contest. It's going to be using a little bit different format than we've used in the past because it's a two-stage format with the 2 Saturdays of racing. The first one, you'll put in selections for the first 9 races. And after those 9 races, when the races are drawn for next week, you'll have an opportunity to change picks. You won't be able to change your picks along the way. You'll put all the picks in for this Friday night, Saturday morning, or Saturday afternoon in Australia. Those races will run. Then you'll have another opportunity to put in selections for next week's races. Once again, once the races start, you won't be able to change those selections. Again, all the details go to tournaments.drf.com. And then on this show, we're going to go over several of the races that are going to be in use. We're not going to do each of the 9 races on Saturday afternoon at Randwick, but we are, before we get into the championships races, offer some thoughts on the race that will go as the second on Saturday, the China Horse Club Carbine Club. Jason, you had a strong fancy in here. Why don't you tell us about it?
Sure do, Peter. Yeah, this is, I think, one of the better bets of the day, probably the best bet on the day. It's number 1. It's called Holy Snow. It's trained by a really informed stable in Mick Price and ridden by Blake Shin, who, of course, has been over in the States riding last year. Holy Snow's been in great form, a terrific win at Caulfield in the Autumn Stakes down in Melbourne on the 10th of February. Followed that up in the Australian Guineas, a really strong Group 1 form race where he got back to last and he finished off well to finish 5th. And then it was an amazing run in the Farlap Stakes last start where he was a runner-up there to a horse called Unforgotten. Unforgotten is now favourite for the Oaks, and so it won the Vinery Stakes, and then it came out and won that race. And then third out of that race was High Am, who also came out and won last start. So the form line reads excellent for Holy Snow. He's having his 4th run this campaign, and I just think he'll be perfectly suited here, stepping up another half furlong to the mile journey. He's my best bet of the day, Holy Snow in race 2.
Excellent. Let's jump ahead to the first race of the championships. That's going to go as race 4. What were you thinking in here if you were to point folks in a direction of maybe 1 or 2 runners they might consider using in this Sky Racing World contest on Friday night Eastern in the USA?
For sure, Peter. It's this is the country championships final. So just to give your listeners a bit of an idea, throughout all of the country areas in New South Wales, we see all of the qualifiers. There's about 8 qualifiers, and the first 2 in each of those heats go through to this final, which is worth $500,000. So it's great for country racing and some of the lesser tracks in New South Wales. I think there are 2 standout chances here, and I think the winner will definitely come from one of them. I'm keen on number 1, Sun Craze. He's never finished worse than second, this horse. In fact, I think he was second 6 times in a row before he cracked it for his first win. And he's really come on this preparation. He's won both starts. Jockey Corey Brown went up to ride him at a place called Musselbrook, which is quite a drive out of Sydney, but he thought it was good enough to go and ride him in a trial up there, or what you might call a workout. So that in itself suggests that he's got a really good rapport with this horse. He loves the trainer. He's drawn well. He's going extremely well, and I think he's going to be very hard to beat. He's currently about 3-1. The only other chance, I think, is a horse called number 3, Don't Give a Damn. He was the early favourite for this race, but then he failed in a Goulburn qualifier. He came back last start and won in the country to qualify for the final, but he's got some foot issues. His trainer said that he was only about 60% fit. That was only last Sunday, so he's got to back up 6 days later, which is not ideal. Probably the best horse in the race, but a few question marks. I'll go with number 1, Some Craze.
Right, a couple of ideas there as we move on to the second championships race, which will go as the 5th. What did you come up with here, Jason?
Well, race 5, this is the chairman's quality, and I think that the form that's ideal for this race is a race called the Manion Cup. And I'm going to go for the Quinella out of that race to run the Quinella here again. And a horse called Alwood, trained by the all-conquering Chris Waller, our number 1 trainer here in New South Wales and probably in Australia with Darren Weir, the 2 dominant trainers. Kieran McAvoy has been riding exceptionally well, one of the world's best jockeys. He's an imported horse who's done exceptionally well without winning since arriving here. He ran second in the Manion Cup, but he got all the way back to second last and really hit the line well. He was wide. He was off the bridle coming to the turn. He's done well here at Randwick, and I think the distance will suit him ideally over this 13-furlong journey. And the winner of that race, Master of Arts, another imported horse, this one for Darren Weir, won that race pretty impressively, the grey, and he also looks hard to beat. So I'd say it'd be probably between those 2, Alwood and Master of Arts. All
right, Alwood and Master of Arts in the 5th as we move ahead on this championships card. What are we looking at in the next race?
Yeah, race 6 here, Peter. This is the English Sires Produce Stakes. So we saw the Golden Slipper run 2 weeks ago, our rich 2-year-old race over 6 furlongs. This is over 7 furlongs, and a lot of the horses coming through the Golden Slipper often go on towards the Sires Produce. Some of them are held back, and that can often be a good sign as well. But I'm going with one of the ones out of the slipper. It's number 14, Seabrook. I think she's a lovely filly. I liked her in the slipper. She was a little bit unlucky. She was wide throughout, and she did a great job to finish 5th to Estajab. Her prior form was excellent. She'd won at Randwick, running some terrific sectionals despite a wide trip there as well. This time she's drawn nicely in barrier number 1. She's from the Inform Mick Price stable. I think she can go on with it now, and the step up to the 7 furlongs is ideal. If there was a danger, it's one that didn't go round in the slipper. A horse called Tchaikovsky for Peter and Paul Snowden, who won the Everest last year, of course, with Red Zell. Sam Clipperton, who rides in Hong Kong, he's come down here to ride Tchaikovsky. Comes off a nice win at Gosford last start. I know the Snowdens have got a good opinion of this colt, and he'll be hard to beat. The horses that I like, Seabrook, currently about $5, and Tchaikovsky currently about 7-1. So a little bit of value there in the Sires Produce.
I like the sound of it, and you're seeing where I'm demonstrating for the folks watching this handicapping session, the USA style PPs. Of course, these prices are just guesses as opposed to the real-time odds that Jason is quoting. How much in this race do you expect those odds to change by race time, or do you think that's a pretty good indication, those current numbers, of where the odds will end up?
I think it's a pretty accurate guide, Peter. Most of the time, our fixed odds markets are pretty well set, and especially in the big races, because you get a lot of early investment money as well. People are keen as soon as those markets go up to invest. So you find that there's quite a bit of money in those fixed odds pools already, and it would take a significant push to change the price of one of these horses. They may change marginally, but I think you can take them as a pretty good guide as to where they'll start.
In race 7, the 3-year-olds take center stage in this Group 1. What are your thoughts on the Derby?
Yeah, the Derby, it's a terrific race, Peter, and great race over the mile and a half here. I'm going to go for a little bit of value in this race for your listeners. I think a horse called Belfast, it's number 14, can win the race. He's a colt by Teofilo. He's trained by some Kiwi trainers, Trent Busselton and Natalie Young, and Karen McAvoy to ride him. He comes through the Tulloch Stakes, which, along with the Rosehill Guineas, are the real 2 form races. Most of the horses coming through either the Tulloch Stakes or the Rosehill Guineas, and most of the recent winners have come through either of those races. This is a horse that I think's got real upside to him, and he's just peaking right at the right time. His run in the Telex Stakes was exceptional. He ran 11.5 seconds for his last 200 metres. It was the quickest 200 metres of the day. Matched any of the sprint races, in fact, beat any of the sprint races. It was a terrific run. And I know the trainers are pretty keen on his chances, and he's about 10-1. So I think he's a really good bet at some nice odds here. I followed a horse called Ace High all the way through his campaign. He comes off some great form lines around Kementari, who'll be favourite in the Doncaster. That's an excellent form. He was wide all the way in the Rosehill Guineas. I thought he did well to finish, only 3 lengths from the winner. He's the obvious favourite. He's about 4-1, and he'll be in the race for a long way. But a bit of value in Belfast to be Ace High.
Yeah, that's always a difficult call for contest players, to choose the races where they're okay, getting stuck in at the lower end of the odds spectrum, or the places where they want to reach and grab a price. I would imagine many of our listeners who are participating will look to be using a mix for the contest on Friday night into Saturday. So depending on whether you want to zig or zag, there's a couple of ideas for you. And the case for Belfast particularly sounds interesting to me. Let's move on to the 8th race, the Darley TJ Smith Stakes. What did you come up with here?
Well, Peter, I think there's a real standout here as well, and he probably is the standout bet of the day. It's number 1, Red Zell, in the TJ Smith. We saw him win the Everest, of course, last year in devastating fashion, and then he came out at Flemington and won the Darley Classic, his second Group 1 in a row. And since he's resumed from a spell, he's done nothing wrong. He very nearly won the Black Caviar Lightning, the Group 1, when he was just run down by Redkirk Warrior right on the post to lose by a nose. He came out and enhanced his credentials by winning the Challenge Stakes very impressively in slick time over 5 furlongs. He steps up to his pet distance now of 6 furlongs. He's at his fitness peak. He's been working brilliantly on the track in between races. He comes into this nice and fresh after 3 weeks off. He won a recent trial. He just ticks all of the boxes. Look, he's currently about 7-5, but I think that's a good price, and I think he's a real standout for your competition players. If there is a danger, this mare In Her Time, number 8, is going exceptionally well. If you want to take on the favourite, she won the Galaxy in great style, and in fact won the Sydney Stakes on Everest Day last year, which was the consolation race, in quicker time than Red Zell. So if there was an upset, I think it might be her, but I'm pretty keen on Red Zell and the TJ Smith.
All right, Red Zell looking to go back-to-back in these big Sky Racing World presented contests, an important, obviously, horse the last time around, and may well be again for this running. The final contest race, not the final race of the afternoon, but the final contest race for Saturday will be the Doncaster Mile. How can we give folks a winner as we approach the halfway point in this contest, Jason?
Well, Peter, I think there's another really good bet here in the form of number 9, Kementari, a really, really smart colt for James Cummings. Breton of Della to ride. Those who watch TVG will see Kementari win a couple of times recently, won the Hobart Bill Stakes, and then came out and won the Randwick Guineas, a great form race for the 3-year-olds. He did it in great style. He came out in the George Ryder Stakes last start and ran just a couple of lengths behind the Mighty Winks. It's a terrific form line. That was at weight for age. He drops back to 51.5 kilos, very lightweight here in a handicap, and he just looks exceptionally well weighted. He's drawn barrier number 2, and I know that they were very keen to win the Doncaster with him, and he looks a standout bet for mine. He's currently about 3-1. I think his biggest danger is Happy Clapper, who also comes out of that George Ryder race. He ran second to Winks, finished in front of Kementari that day by about 3/4 of a length, but probably had a slightly better run, and he's got to carry a much bigger weight. Kementari 51.5 kilos, Happy Clapper 57 kilos. So I think it's between those two. Can't really see anything else unless it gets a charmed run challenging. If you wanted one at a bit of odds and you were keen to take them on, a horse called Lanciato, number 11. He's currently about 17-1. He's going exceptionally well. It's his toughest test to date, but if there's a blowout, it might be him, but I'm pretty keen on Kementari here, Peter.
All right, I like the sound of it. We talked a little bit about Winks, looking at those form lines in that race. We've had some questions come in from listeners. We're going to look ahead to the second Saturday of the championships, but we'll pepper in some listener questions as well. And one of the questions concerned Winks and what you see in her future and how good you really think she is. Folks around the world, it's created quite a stir here in the United States even, but then other folks who are more geared into USA racing aren't quite sure what to make of her and have a real gauge on how good she is. Give us your thoughts.
Absolutely, Peter. Well, to my eyes, she's the best horse that I've ever seen. Of course, you go back to to horses like Farlap from the 1930s and Tulloch from the 1950s and these type of horses. But certainly in my time, she's the best horse I've ever seen. She hasn't really looked like being beaten in the last 25 starts. Of course, she started off her career as a good racehorse, but certainly not the exceptional one we see now. But she's just gone to another level in the last couple of years, and it just continues to impress. I think she's deservedly now the top-ranked horse in the world. She has been for, let's face it, about 2.5 years, I think. I know Arrogant ran exceptionally well in Dubai, and that was a career-best performance, and I know how well Gunrunner is going now, and shares that top billing, but she's just an exceptional animal. She's got a high cruising speed, and she just does it easy. It's remarkable to watch. It's like watching poetry in motion, watching Winks. She's been able to win from distances from 5.5 furlongs all the way up to 11 furlongs. She's won at Weight for Age. She's won in handicapped. They've taken on the best Australia's got to throw at her, and she's been able to come up and win every time. She's overcome adversity. She's missed the start, and she's still been able to win. They've tried different tactics on her when they've gone to the lead, and she's still been able to run them down. The association she's got with Hugh Bowman is one of the most outstanding horse jockey relationships, I think, in world racing, and I think she'll go down as one of the greats ever. 25 in a row, if she happens to win on the second day of the championships, that will equal the great Black Caviar. I think she's better than Black Caviar, only because she's been able to win over more distances and against better horses than Black Caviar was, because she was just a sprinter. And I think Winks will probably go on after the Queen Elizabeth, and I'm pretty sure she'll win that. She'll have a spell, and she'll come back for the Melbourne Spring Carnival, and she'll have a couple of lead-up races in top company before she shoots for her 4th Cox Plate. It's a record I don't think will ever be broken, and then I think they might retire at the end of this year. We were mentioning off air, Peter, that there was the opportunity for her to go to Royal Ascot and race in perhaps the Queen Anne, and the owners of the horse, they're not that keen to travel with her because she's getting towards the end of her career, and they're just worried about the welfare of the horse, and they want to extend her racing career. And there's huge prize money here in Australia as well. That plays a part. And there's always the danger when you travel a horse that they might not acclimatise to a northern hemisphere type environment. So I think they made the right decision, and it'll be great to see her here in Australia in the Queen Elizabeth on Saturday week, and then back in the spring, hopefully for her swan song 4th Cox Plate in a row. Amazing
story. She's been all the way through, and an amazing ending, perhaps in the offing. And I agree, as somebody who will be attending Royal Ascot this year, obviously disappointing to lose the star power, but from the point of view of the owners, it certainly makes sense. Let's move on and talk about what we know as of now about the championships races that are going to be held next Saturday. From this far out, is there anything you're comfortable tipping, Jason, or if failing that, I know it's a long way out, if you could just give us a little bit of an overview of at least the biggest races on the afternoon, we'd love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, absolutely, Peter. Happy to. It's the Queen Elizabeth is obviously the biggest race on day 2 of the championships. It's the $4 million race. Huge money on offer there, over 1.25 miles. That's the race that Winks is shooting for, and she's been the favourite throughout, all the way through. She's currently about 1-9 for that race. Very, very skinny price, as you might expect, with her victories in the Chipping Norton and then again in the George Ryder, beating Happy Clapper and Kementari. I think if she'll be winning that, she'll draw a huge crowd out to Randwick on Saturday week, and I can't see her being beaten. It's a pet distance, and it's a race that she's won the last 2 years. She'll be winning. I think the Japanese horse might be a good chance of running a race here. A horse called Ambitious, who ran second in the Tancred Stakes behind Almandon. He's now out here in Australia. and I think he might be able to run the Quinella in this race. I really like the way he won. Anthony Friedman now trains him down in Melbourne, so I think he'll run a race. But if you're just tipping one, Winks is certainly the way to go, and I think everybody will be on board there in that race. The other big race on the card is the Schweppes Sydney Cup. It's over 2 miles. And I think there's a standout here, Peter, Al Mandan. Of course, he won the Melbourne Cup, as many of your listeners will remember, back in 2016 for owner Lloyd Williams. He's found his best form again. He went around in the Australian Cup at Flemington about a month ago, and he's very unlucky that day. He was held up for a run, and he did well to finish 4th behind Harlem before he came here to Rose Hill last week, and he won that Tancred Stakes, beating home Ambitious, and did it pretty easy, I thought. And the goal all along for him has been the Sydney Cup. And when Lloyd Williams, the owner, wants to achieve something, he generally gets it done. So I think Al Mandan is a real standout in that race, the Sydney Cup. And I suppose the other big race coming up next week is the Australian Oaks. Now, this is a much harder race. You've got several different form lines coming into this. But I've been really impressed with a filly called High Am. I've been following her throughout, and we tipped her on TVG last week in the Vinery, and she won at about 12-1. I'm pretty keen to stick with her. She led all the way that day, over 1.25 miles. She steps up to the 1.5 miles on Saturday week of the Oaks, but she just races like a real Oaks filly. And again, it's Mick Price, the trainer, who's been going exceptionally well. His horses are firing on all cylinders at the moment. And you know what it's like in the States as well. You start following hot trainers, you start backing winners, and he's certainly training a lot of them. But I think she can probably get her own way in front again here in that race. The horse called Unforgotten for Chris Waller looks the hardest to beat. We finished 2nd, but I'll stick with High Am to win the Oaks on Saturday week.
All right, lots of good stuff there. Folks who are probably taking notes furiously, just to let everybody know, you can re-watch this show. It will be archived, probably not till tomorrow morning, maybe late tonight. You can find it again at drf.com/YouTube. We just have a couple of minutes left for questions. The first one will just be me asking you, Jason, if I want to see more of your work, more of your coverage of the championships this weekend, where can I tune in and see you?
Well, we're on TVG on Friday night, so from about 6 p.m. Pacific, Mike Joyce from TVG has made his way to Sydney, and he'll be with me trackside, and we'll be covering all of the action during day 1 and day 2 of the championships. So between about 6 p.m. and at midnight Pacific, we'll have all of the late mail. We'll have some interviews with the leading trainers, and we'll have some commentary as well, some tips for each of those big races on a 10-race card. So looking forward to working with Mike on TVG on Friday night.
Joyce let loose on Australia once again. The original was so good, they brought him back for a sequel. I like it. A few listener questions to get to. This one comes from Joseph. Is Bowman hurt, he asks, or serving a suspension or something? I don't fully understand where he's coming from with that, but do you have any information on Bowman's status?
Yeah, he's had a few issues. You remember he had that fall just prior to the Golden Slipper when he fell off Performer, and he sustained a concussion on that occasion. And he came back and rode for a couple of meetings, but he's just taken a little bit of a break in between now, I think, to just recharge the batteries. I think it might have taken a little bit more out of him than first aforementioned, and I think it's probably more of a precautionary measure than anything. Obviously, his priority is going to be sticking with Winks in the Queen Elizabeth, so I don't think he's going to take any chances in between now and then in making sure he's 100% fit. So, no, he's not suspended. It's just, I think, a precautionary measure to make sure that he's okay to ride her on Saturday week.
Well, that's interesting. It shows the amount of purse money on offer shows just how seriously he takes that partnership, and clearly agrees with you about her status. That makes perfect sense in the big picture of life. Here's a question about Randwick itself. Does the stretch lend itself well to closers? John wants to know.
Well, John, it's certainly can do. Absolutely, it's a track that can play fairly to both leaders and closers, and often we see, there can be a little bit of bias to one or the other, depending on how the track plays on the day. There's often more bias when there is rain about, so you often have to watch the first couple of races to see who it's suiting when there's been some wet weather about. Sometimes you'll find, you need to be on the fence or you need to be up front and leading to have any chance. Sometimes you need to get to the outside fence and come from behind. But generally, when it's a good track like it'll be on Saturday, you'll find that most horses will get their chance. Any sort of bias will only be tempo related, and I expect that it'll race very truly on Saturday. It's probably the best condition the track's been in for the championship since its inauguration. We've been very lucky with the weather. Often it rains at Easter time here in Sydney. It's just one of those anomalies, I guess. But this year we've been lucky and we've had sunny conditions for a couple of weeks. So if you're backing a back marker, I'd say back it with confidence. It gets every chance at Randwick.
That's great. And it's nice on these big racing days when the results can be decided not by a configuration bias or a track bias, but by who the best horse is. And hopefully those will be the conditions on the next 2 Saturdays at Randwick. Tournament-specific question here about Winks. If it makes sense to play a horse that short in a contest, that's a tricky one. Normally I would say in a contest, especially a contest like this where we're going to be expecting to have an awful lot of entries when you have a free roll for this type of a prize. We've got a prize, this VIP trip for 2 to the Everest tournament that is worth about 6,000 USD. And it's, you have one winner out of however many hundreds of entries you're going to get. Usually in the big field, with the kind of bunching you get, the importance of any points is exaggerated, which would lead me to say, hey, take the points with Winks. On the other hand, if you want to win when you have such a big field, to be one of the few people who could come up with an upset winner might be a strategy that makes sense. I guess in the end, it just comes down to your gambling personality. What's your gut on that question, Jason?
Yeah, it's a good point that you make, Peter. I think with Winks, though, she's going to win. So I think you've got to go around her to try and find some value. She's as close to a good thing as you'll see in racing in that Queen Elizabeth Stakes. I think, there's so many other races in this competition that you can find some value in those other races. And if you go against Winks and she wins, you're not going to win. Like your chances are really diminished, and you'll be losing ground to the field. So I think with her, I think it's just, if I was playing the competition, I'd be sticking her in and definitely having her as my top tip. And I'd be looking for some value around some of those other races. I mentioned some of those other ones coming up, maybe in the Derby, maybe in the Size Produce. There's certainly races where you could find a double figure odds price winner. That might be the way to get a bit of an edge and sneak your way in front right up the top of the leaderboard.
Quick final question before we let you go. I know you have to get to work, but this is one we also talked about off air. For an American racing fan looking to plan a trip to Australia, when would you recommend he or she trying to make the journey?
Well, it's I think there's 2 times of the year that you really want to come out and experience Australia. The number one definitely would be in Melbourne Cup Week, which is the early part of November. I know it generally clashes with the Breeders' Cup. For those listeners that go out to the Breeders' Cup, it kind of clashes about that time of the year. But if you can make your way out here during early November, you'll see one of the best weeks of racing in the world. Go to Flemington and you'll see Derby Day on Saturday. I think that's usually about the 4th or 5th or 6th of November. Melbourne Cup Day is on the Tuesday. Oaks Day on the Thursday, and then Stakes Day the following Saturday. It's one of the most incredible weeks. Crowds of up to 100,000 people on all 4 days. The track looks fantastic. The atmosphere around Melbourne is electric. Everybody wants to talk about racing, and some of the best horses in the world are there from both Australia and overseas. That's an incredible week of racing in early November. The other one is the championships right now, where we're going to find 2 weeks of great racing. Again, lots of talk about racing and lots of energy in Sydney. Sydney, I think, is certainly the best city in Australia. We've got a beautiful harbour and lots of great things to do. So either this time of year in April or certainly that first week in November.
I'm not going to take any chances, Jason. I'm going to put both on the bucket list so I can make sure to get both those experiences in two of the great cities in the world, neither of which I've ever had the pleasure to be in. And I may tack on some time and try to get over and check out a little New Zealand as well. But got to be getting down there at some point in the near future. And I want to just thank you one more time for taking time out this morning and sharing all these thoughts with us. We look forward to seeing you on TVG and getting together with you again for another handicapping session or podcast in the near future. Thanks so much for your time.
It's been an absolute pleasure, Peter. Really enjoyed chatting about the racing, and to all of your listeners and viewers this morning. And I hope to see you and anybody else in Australia soon. You'll be very welcome. We'd love to see you out here.
Excellent. That is all the time we have. Thanks so much to everybody for tuning in, especially those of you who ask questions. Once again, you can catch the archive, drf.com/YouTube. That's all the time we have. I'm Peter Thomas Fornatale, and you've been watching content produced by drf.com.